Hi, it's Saturday the 24th, I think, and our Moravian text this morning is 1 Corinthians 7, verse 1 to 16. And this is a passage that anyone growing up in a Christian youth group may well be familiar with, sex in marriage. And at a first glance, you may think, well, what has a very religious, celibate, single man in the first century got to teach us about sex in our current culture and time? And apart from slightly ignoring the fact that all scripture is God breathed and there's a whole preach in that, let's actually look at the context in which Paul is speaking. He's been talking quite a lot in this letter about sexual immorality, and yesterday's reflection included that. But he's speaking to a church, mostly people who've been living in a pagan background, in a city that's thriving on luxuriant trade, lots of silk traders. It's a city where luxury and opulence is common. It was famous for the temple of Aphrodite, with thousands of temple prostitutes, where sex was very much a commodity. And you could almost say that sex was idolized. Now, does any of that sound familiar? So let's look at what Paul says. And the first thing rather, is that he's responding to a specific question, which is interesting, and I've never noticed before. The first verse says, the matters you wrote about. So Paul isn't just kind of riffing on this is how you should live. He's responding in that pastoral father tone of, you've asked about this, so let's explore it. And the question is really interesting because it's well, because of all the immorality, maybe we just shouldn't have sex. Even married people, we just shouldn't have sex. And it's like the Corinthians are saying, just give us a rule. And how easy it is, and how much we want to just live by rules. It's simple then. And I think this passage actually, Paul is gently leading them to, it's not quite as simple of do this, do that, and you'll be fine. You need to explore this. You need to follow God in this. You need to find his wisdom. And that's what he does. And it's a mixture through this passage of, this is what I feel God says, but actually this is my opinion. He's quite careful to do the both. But actually when you read through it all, it's like, well, there's a bit of make up your mind in the light of Scripture, in the light of what you know of Christ. So let's look at what he says then. And the first thing to say is peace. Right at the end of this Scripture, he says, live at peace. There's a really high value for Paul. Live in peace as far as possible. And the second key theme through this passage is relationship and serving relationship. So he says, just because there's sexual immorality, that doesn't mean stop having sex. It's a gift within marriage, because that is the strength of the relationship that can bear this serving attitude that he then talks about. And I was thinking about how to say this, and then, I mean, literally this morning I just thought, I'll just have a quick look in the message, and actually the message just sums it up really, really well. So instead of saying what I was going to say, I'll just read this. And it says, the marriage bed must be a place of mutuality. The husband seeking to satisfy his wife, the wife seeking to satisfy her husband. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. Marriage is a decision to serve the other, whether in bed or not. And that's a great summary of what Paul's saying. It's like, this is not a place to say, these are my needs, these are my demands, you are there to meet them. Again, maybe familiar in our culture, that sex is very much, this is about me meeting a need that I have. And look, I can meet it in all sorts of different ways without any need for any relationship. And Paul is saying, no, this is a beautiful gift from God within a committed, monogamous relationship. And that's where the strength and the beauty of it really comes. And it becomes no longer a commodity and a right, but something as God designed. The final thing just to say then is about, and again, familiar to anyone that's maybe considered international mission. Should I stay single for the Lord? Should I get married? It's hard to comment as a married man, but I do remember in that context of there being almost that was the goal, to get married in a late 20s, a load of Christian singles in Frontline. And after we got married, a good friend of ours who was still single said, can you imagine what it's like not to be married anymore? As if like, oh, you've reached the pinnacle of everything you've been aiming for. And I reflected on that, and I had to say, yeah, of course. Because you realise that actually God's will for your life is the absolute only place to be, whether that's married or single. And again, Paul is saying, this is something between you and God. He would love everyone to be free to do to live the sort of life that he did. Always on the road, always on mission, building churches, raising people up, having that flexibility. But he recognises actually that marriage is an important gift as well to the church. So just finally on that, that verse about peace, and he's saying that, even though he's counselling that divorce is wrong, and I think he's mainly talking about divorce on the basis of that right. It's like, oh, I'm a bit bored now I don't have enough of a sex life in this kind of context, therefore I'm going to divorce my wife, normally, or husband, but in this culture the man would probably more likely be doing the divorcing. And he's saying, no, that's wrong. But if you are married to an unbeliever and they walk away, don't stay in that relationship, live in peace and allow them to go. So the two key things, live in peace and live in serving relationship. And this is a great picture of sex's part in that. Have a great day.